In the midst of a flourishing world, a shadow fell. The Black Death swept through Europe with a force that silenced towns and upended lives. This is that story. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and decay. In the village square, a pyre burned with the bodies of those who had fallen to the plague. Flies buzzed around the flames, and the distant wail of mourning could be heard. A lone priest moved through the crowd, his black robe billowing in the smoky air, offering last rites as he went. The villagers shuffled forward, their faces drawn with grief and fear. The village, once a hub of daily life and laughter, now stood silent. Its wooden frame was stained dark by the passing days, a stark contrast to the pale, sickly faces that gathered at its edge. A lone woman knelt beside it, her hands trembling as she dipped her bucket into the murky water. The silence was punctuated only by the distant cries of scavenging birds and the rustling of leaves carried by an oppressive wind. The village street lay quiet under a grey sky, cobblestones slick with rain, shuttered windows and empty doorways hinted at lives abruptly halted. A lone figure moved through the deserted lanes, their steps muffled by the thin layer of dust. The distant church steeple rose like a sentinel, its bells silent. Here and there, signs of struggle remained, discarded shoes, half-burned candles in gutters. The air hung heavy with unspoken loss. The village blacksmith's forge had grown cold. Iron tools lay abandoned on the anvil, their edges dulled by neglect. Ashes clung to the hearthstones, a reminder of fires not recently stoked. Outside, the wind whispered through empty fields once vibrant with crops. Inside, shadows danced where there should have been the glow of hot metal and the rhythmic clang of hammer on steel. Now, only silence filled the space, heavy with absence. In the village centre, a market stall stood abandoned, its rotting fruits and vegetables scattered by scavengers. The wooden boards were slick with rain, their edges curling under the damp. A single candle flickered in a nearby window, casting eerie shadows across the cobblestones. The air was thick with the scent of decay and smoke from distant pyres. Here and there, discarded prayer books lay open, their pages fluttering in the cold wind, as if the hands that held them had simply vanished. Shadows clung to the cobblestones as rain fell softly over the village square. Smoke spiraled from a distant pyre, carrying with it the acrid scent of burning flesh. In the midst of this desolation, figures in black robes moved silently, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Homes stood empty, shutters closed against the elements, while the distant church steeple rose like a silent sentinel over the scene. The only sound was the soft patter of rain and the occasional cry of scavenging birds. The village graveyard was a sea of fresh earth, mounded graves stretching under the heavy sky. A lone priest moved among them, his cassock dark with rain and sweat. His voice rose in prayer, barely audible over the rustling leaves and distant cries. Each grave held a silent story, each mound a final resting place for a life cut short. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil and decay, a reminder of nature's relentless cycle. The village inn stood silent, the door hanging ajar, revealing the dim interior. Shadows pulled in corners where once laughter echoed. A single candle guttered on the bar, casting long shadows across empty stools and overturned mugs. Outside, rain tapped against the window panes, each drop a reminder of lives extinguished too soon. The air was thick with the scent of stale ale and decay, mingling in a haunting blend that clung to the walls like a shroud. The village square echoed with silence, save for raindrops pattering against cobblestones. In the distance, smoke curled from a pyre, carrying the acrid scent of burning flesh on the wind. Figures in black robes moved silently through the rain, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Homes stood empty, shutters closed tight against the elements. The distant church steeple rose like a silent sentinel over the scene, its spire piercing the heavy sky. The village stood silent, its rope hanging loosely over the stone rim. Around it, the ground was trampled and muddy from countless feet that had come for water, now still. A single bucket lay on its side, half filled with rainwater reflecting the dull sky above. Inside the well, a faint echo of dripping water mingled with the scent of earth and decay. The air felt heavy, as if holding its breath, waiting. The village forge stood cold and silent, its iron bellows still from lack of use. Inside, the anvil lay untouched, a shadow in the dim light filtering through broken shutters. The air was thick with the scent of rusted metal and decay, a stark contrast to the once bustling hubbub of hammer-on steel. A single cobweb hung from a beam, swaying gently as if mourning the absence of life. The village market stood desolate, stalls overturned and empty, their once vibrant colours now faded by rain and neglect. A lone rooster crowed from an abandoned co-op, its call echoing off stone walls. Shadows danced across the cobblestones as clouds scuttled across the sky, casting fleeting patches of light on the ground. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth, a haunting reminder of lives snuffed out too soon. The village churchyard was a sea of fresh earth, mounds heaped high under the rain-soaked sky. Gravediggers paused, leaning on their spades, faces streaked with mud and sweat. Inside the chapel, flickering candles cast long shadows across rows of pews, now empty save for an old woman kneeling in prayer, her rosary beads worn smooth by years of use. Outside, a bell tolled mournfully, each chime echoing through the silent village like a dirge. The village tavern, once the heart of merriment and news, now echoed with only the soft patter of rain against its roof. Inside, tables were overturned, chairs scattered like fallen leaves, cobwebs draped from the rafters, catching the dim light that filtered through broken shutters. The air was thick with the sour tang of stale ale and decay. A single candle flickered on a cracked stone hearth, casting eerie shadows across the silent room, where whispers seemed to linger in the oppressive silence. In the village square, the cobblestones glisten under the dreary sky, each stone a mirror to the muted world above. A lone figure stumbles towards the churchyard, shoulders hunched against the gill. The air is thick with the scent of rain and decay, mingling with the faint echo of the bell tolling mournfully in the distance. The village blacksmith's forge was silent, the anvil cold and untouched. Smoke from a distant fire curled lazily into the overcast sky. Inside, the air hung heavy with the metallic scent of iron and coal, now mingled with a faint, unsettling sweetness. Shadows pooled in corners where once strong arms swung hammers. A single ember glowed dimly in the hearth, flickering like the last breath of life. Rain pattered softly on the cobblestones, each drop a whisper of despair. The village square was a stage for emptiness, with only the occasional shadow dancing under the heavy clouds. A lone figure stumbled through the downpour, shoulders hunched against the cold and the weight of their sorrow. The distant tolling of the church bell echoed mournfully, a dirge for those lost to the plague. Shadows pooled in corners where once children played, now silent sentinels over the desolate landscape. The village cemetery, once a quiet resting place for the departed, now teemed with new graves. The air was thick with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil and the faint, sickly sweet odour of decay. Shadows stretched long under the heavy sky as mourners huddled near the open pits, their faces obscured by hooded cloaks. A single torch flickered weakly in the drizzle, casting eerie light over the scene where lifeless forms were laid to rest with hurried, silent rituals. The village inn was a cavern of silence, the heavy wooden door hanging slightly ajar. Inside, the hearth was cold and dark, shadows pooling in corners where once laughter echoed. A single candle flickered weakly on the bar, casting long shadows across the scarred surface. Outside, rain continued to patter softly against the worn roof tiles, each drop a solitary note of desolation. The air smelled of damp earth and the faint remnants of meals left uneaten. The wind whispered through empty streets, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. The village well stood silent, chains rusted where once they clinked with each bucket's lift. A lone cat prowled the perimeter, its fur matted from the relentless rain. Inside a shuttered house, a candle flickered weakly, casting pale light through cracks in the wooden shutters. Outside, shadows danced under the heavy sky, a silent vigil for those lost to the plague. The village churchyard, now a place of hurried burials and silent grief. Shadows loomed large under the heavy sky as mourners huddled near open pits, their faces obscured by hooded cloaks. A single torch flickered weakly in the drizzle, casting an eerie light over the scene where lifeless forms were laid to rest with hurried, silent rituals. The air was thick with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil and the faint, sickly sweet odour of decay. The village blacksmith's forge, once a hub of clanging hammers and fiery heat, now lay cold and silent. Shadows pooled in the corners where coal had been heaped high. A single candle flickered weakly on a workbench cluttered with half-finished tools and cold ash. Outside, rain pattered softly against the roof, each drop a solitary echo of abandonment. The air smelled of damp earth and rusting iron, a stark contrast to the once bustling forge. The village square, once vibrant with market stalls, now echoes only with the pattering rain. A single torch casts long shadows over empty cobblestones and scattered debris. Hooded figures move like ghosts through the drizzle, their faces obscured by hoods. The air is thick with earthy decay and a faint, sickly sweet odour. Each step sinks into the muddy ground, a silent reminder of life lost to the plague. The village outskirts, where the forest meets the fields, now a place of eerie quiet. A lone wolf howls in the distance, its mournful cry echoing through the trees. The air is thick with the scent of wet leaves and earthy decay. Abandoned carts lie half buried in mud, their wheels caked with dirt from unused months. Each step sinks into the soft ground, a quiet reminder of the silent village left behind. The village tavern, once filled with laughter and the clink of mugs, now echoed only with the drip of rainwater from a cracked roof tile. Shadows pooled in the corners where patrons had gathered around hearths that were now cold and dark. A single candle flickered weakly on a scarred wooden table, casting anemic light over empty benches and overturned stools. The air smelled of stagnant ale and the faint, persistent odour of decay, a stark reminder of lives cut short. Rain patters softly against the muddy ground, each drop a solitary echo of abandonment. Abandoned carts lie half buried in mud, their wheels caked with dirt from unused months. A lone wolf track weaves through the scene, a mournful howl echoing through the trees. Hooded figures move like ghosts through the drizzle, their faces obscured by hoods, silent reminders of lives lost to the plague. The air is thick with the scent of wet leaves and earthy decay. The air hung heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and decaying leaves. A solitary crow cawed from a bare tree branch, its call echoing through the empty village streets. Abandoned homes stood silent, their windows dark and unseeing. In the distance, smoke rose lazily from an extinguished hearth, a ghostly reminder of lives once lived. The ground beneath was soft and yielding, each step sinking into the damp soil as if the earth itself mourned. The village cemetery, once a place of quiet reverence, now overflows with hastily dug graves. Rain-soaked earth clings to the spades of those who dig, each shovel full heavy with the weight of loss. A lone figure, cloaked and hooded, moves through the rain, leaving faint footprints in the mud. The air is thick with the scent of wet soil and a faint undertone of decay, a grim reminder of the relentless plague that has claimed so many. In the village cemetery, rain-soaked earth clings to spades as graves overflow with bodies. A solitary figure moves through the mud, hooded and cloaked, leaving faint footprints in the churned soil. Each shovelful is heavy with loss, the scent of wet earth mingling with decay. Trees stand silent witnesses, their branches bare against the sombre sky. The air is thick with the weight of lives cut short, a stark reminder of the plague's relentless grip. A lone priest moves through the village, his robes heavy with rain. Each step leaves a muddy imprint on the path that leads to the church. The door creaks as he enters, and the sound echoes in the silent sanctuary. Candles flicker weakly on the altar, casting shadows over the pews where empty benches await their vanished congregation. The air is thick with the scent of wet wood and incense, a ghostly reminder of lives once gathered here. The village square lies silent, a ghostly echo of its former life. Abandoned carts rest against crumbling walls, their wheels still caked with mud from the last journey before silence fell. Rain-soaked leaves crunch underfoot as hooded figures move through the drizzle, faces obscured by shadow. A single candle flickers weakly in one window, a solitary light in the encroaching darkness. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and decay, a grim reminder of lives lost to the plague's relentless grip. The village square was a shadow of its former self, now silent and desolate under the grey twilight. Rain-soaked cobblestones glistened beneath the feet of hooded figures moving through the drizzle. Each step left faint imprints in the churned mud, marking their solitary passage through this ghost town. Abandoned carts leaned against crumbling walls, their wheels caked with earth from the last journey before silence fell. The air was thick with the scent of decay and wet wood, a grim reminder of lives lost to the plague. The sound of a distant bell, faint and mournful, echoes through the empty village. A lone figure moves along the cobblestone path, hood pulled low over their eyes, leaving behind only faint footprints in the mud. Abandoned homes stand silent witness to the tragedy, windows dark and door frames creaking in the wind. The air is heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and a lingering undertone of decay, a somber reminder of the lives lost to the plague's unyielding grip. Rain-slicked cobblestones glisten under the pale moonlight as a hooded figure shuffles through the village. The air, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decay, carries whispers of distant cries. Each step leaves faint prints in the churned mud, marking the path of sorrow. Abandoned homes stand silent witness, windows dark and door frames creaking in the wind. Inside, a single candle flickers weakly on an empty hearth, casting shadows over the cold stone walls. Inside an abandoned home, shadows dance on cold stone walls from a flickering candle. Outside, rain-soaked cobblestones reflect pale moonlight as hooded figures shuffle through the silent village. Each step leaves faint prints in churned mud. The air is thick with decay and wet earth, carrying whispers of distant cries. Windows are dark, door frames creaking in the wind. This place, once alive with laughter and commerce, now echoes only with sorrow. The air hung heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and decay, a constant reminder of loss. In the village square, a hooded figure paused by an abandoned cart, its wheels caked in mud from the last journey before silence fell. The sound of distant cries carried on the wind, mingling with the soft creaking of door frames swaying in the breeze. Inside one home, shadows danced across cold stone walls from a flickering candle, casting eerie silhouettes that seemed to move of their own accord. The distant cries faded into the night as a hooded figure paused by an open doorway, the wind carrying whispers of decay. Inside, shadows shifted across cold stone walls from a flickering candle, casting long, eerie silhouettes that danced in the draught. Each step through the mud left faint prints on the rain-soaked cobblestones. The village square lay silent under the pale moonlight, abandoned carts leaning against crumbling walls, their wheels caked with earth from the last journey before silence fell. The village square lay deserted under the moonlit sky, cobblestones glistening with rain. A hooded figure moved silently along the path, leaving faint prints in the churned earth. Abandoned carts leaned against crumbling walls, their wheels caked in mud from the last journey before stillness fell. Inside a home, shadows danced across cold stone walls from a flickering candle, casting eerie silhouettes that seemed to move of their own accord. The night was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and decay, a constant reminder of loss. A hooded figure moved silently through the village, each step leaving faint prints in the churned mud. Inside an abandoned home, shadows danced across cold stone walls from a flickering candle, casting eerie silhouettes that seemed to move of their own accord. The distant cries had faded, replaced by the soft creaking of door frames swaying in the breeze. Outside, rain-soaked cobblestones reflected pale moonlight, and abandoned carts leaned against crumbling walls. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the cold stone walls, dancing with an eerie light of its own. Outside, rain-soaked cobblestones glistened under a pale moon, reflecting silent sorrow. A hooded figure paused at the edge of the village square, where abandoned carts leaned against crumbling walls, their wheels caked in mud. The air was thick with decay and whispers of distant cries, now barely audible over the soft creaking of door frames swaying in the wind. The night air carried whispers of decay as hooded figures moved through the deserted village square. Rain-soaked cobblestones glistened under a pale moon, reflecting silent sorrow. Abandoned carts leaned against crumbling walls, their wheels caked in mud from the last journey before stillness fell. Inside an abandoned home, shadows danced across cold stone walls from a flickering candle, casting eerie silhouettes that seemed to move of their own accord. The soft creaking of door frames swayed in the breeze, a haunting echo of life now lost. The soft rustling of cloth against cold stone filled the silence. A flickering candle cast a weak glow over the interior, its light barely reaching the far corners where shadows clung like mourners at a graveside. Outside, abandoned carts leaned against crumbling walls under a moon that offered little warmth. Each breath carried the scent of rain and decay, a constant reminder of the village's recent fate. The hooded figure paused, listening to the soft creaking of door frames swaying in the wind, their echoes the only sound breaking the oppressive quiet. The distant howl of a lone wolf broke the stillness. Inside the abandoned home, shadows flickered across cold stone walls from a candle that teetered on collapse. Rain-soaked cobblestones outside reflected moonlight in ghostly pools, and the air was thick with decay's scent. Abandoned carts leaned against crumbling walls, their wheels silent witnesses to the village's sudden silence. Each breath carried a chill that seemed to seep into bone, as if the night itself mourned what had been lost. The night pressed down like a shroud, heavy with rain-soaked earth and decay. Shadows moved through the village square, hooded figures silent as ghosts. Inside an abandoned home, a candle teetered on collapse, its light barely piercing the darkness. Outside, rain-slick cobblestones reflected moonlight in ghostly pools. Each breath carried the chill of loss, seeping into bones like the night's sorrow. Abandoned carts leaned against crumbling walls, silent witnesses to the village's sudden silence. The scent of damp earth filled the air as a hooded figure moved cautiously through the deserted village. Each step echoed on the rain-soaked cobblestones, the sound mingling with distant whispers of wind through empty windows. Inside an abandoned home, shadows danced across cold stone walls from a flickering candle that seemed to struggle against the encroaching darkness. Outside, moonlight glinted off puddles, casting ghostly reflections on the worn faces of crumbling walls. The night held its breath, a silent witness to a hooded figure moved stealthily through the deserted village square, each step echoing on rain-soaked cobblestones. Moonlight glinted off puddles, casting ghostly reflections on crumbling walls. Inside an abandoned home, a candle teetered on collapse, its light barely reaching the shadows that danced across cold stone walls. The air smelled of decay and damp earth, a constant reminder of the village's tragic fate. Each breath seemed to carry the sorrow of what once was. Moonlight bathed the village in an eerie, ghostly glow. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and decay. A hooded figure moved silently through the deserted streets, the sound of their footsteps barely audible on the cobblestones. Inside a home, shadows danced across stone walls from the flickering candlelight, casting long, distorted shapes that seemed to mock the silence. Each breath felt heavy with sorrow, as if the night itself was mourning what had been lost. The night air clung to the cobblestones, heavy with moisture and the faint scent of decay. Inside an abandoned home, a single candle burned low, its light barely reaching the corners where shadows lurked. Outside, the wind whispered through empty windows, carrying distant echoes of sorrow. A hooded figure paused by the door, the cold settling deep into their bones as they gazed upon the silent village square. Each step forward was a testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming loss. The distant howl of wolves sliced through the night as a hooded figure moved silently along the rain-soaked cobblestones. Inside an abandoned home, shadows danced across cold stone walls from a flickering candle that seemed to struggle against the encroaching darkness. Each breath carried the scent of decay and rain, a constant reminder of the village's tragic fate. The night held its breath, a silent witness to what had been lost. Inside the abandoned home, a single candle flickered weakly, its light barely piercing the encroaching shadows. The hooded figure moved cautiously, each step sinking slightly into the thick dust that coated the floor. Outside, the wind moaned through empty windows, carrying whispers of decay and rain-soaked earth. The distant howl of wolves echoed through the silent night, a mournful reminder of what had been lost. Each breath felt heavy with sorrow, as if the very air held the weight of countless unspoken goodbyes. The hooded figure paused before an open doorway, the wind carrying whispers through the empty space. Inside, A single candle cast flickering shadows on cracked plaster walls, each movement of flame a stark reminder of time's relentless march. Outside, the village square lay silent under the moon, cobblestones slick with rain. A distant owl hooted, its call echoing off abandoned homes. Each step forward was a journey into the heart of loss, where sorrow hung heavy in the air like a shroud. Outside the abandoned home, the hooded figure paused, the chill of the night seeping into their bones. A single candle cast flickering shadows across cracked plaster walls inside, each movement of flame a stark reminder of time's relentless march. The wind moaned through empty windows, carrying whispers of decay and rain-soaked earth. Distant howls echoed off abandoned homes, a mournful chorus in the night. Each breath felt heavy with sorrow, as if the air itself was weighted with countless unspoken goodbyes. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and decay, a heavy perfume that hung over the village like a shroud. In the distance, an owl hooted, its call mournful against the silence. The hooded figure moved through the shadows, each step careful on the slick cobblestones. Inside the abandoned home, the candle's flickering light cast dancing shadows across the cracked walls, a stark reminder of time's relentless passage. Each breath felt like a burden, weighted with sorrow and loss. The hooded figure moved silently through the village, each step a careful balance on rain-slick cobblestones. Inside the abandoned home, the candle's flickering light barely pierced the encroaching darkness, casting long shadows that danced across cracked plaster walls. Outside, the wind whispered secrets of decay and loss through empty windows. The distant howl of wolves mingled with the mournful hoots of owls, a haunting symphony of sorrow. Each breath was heavy with the weight of unspoken goodbyes. The hooded figure moved through the village square, each step resonating on slick cobblestones beneath the moonlit sky. Abandoned homes loomed like silent sentinels, windows dark and empty. Inside one home, the candle flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced across cracked plaster walls. Outside, whispers of decay carried by the wind mingled with distant hoots of owls and howls of wolves. Each breath was a heavy burden, as if the air itself held countless unspoken goodbyes. The hooded figure paused at the edge of the village, where the cobblestones gave way to overgrown grass and wildflowers. A faint scent of decay lingered in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of rain-soaked soil. Inside an abandoned home, a single candle flickered weakly, its light barely piercing the thick shadows that clung to the walls like mourning cloths. Outside, the wind whispered through empty windows, carrying distant echoes of sorrow and loss. The wind whispered through the village, carrying with it a scent of decay and rain-soaked earth. Inside an abandoned home, shadows danced across cracked walls as a single candle flickered weakly in the draught. Outside, the howls of wolves and hoots of owls filled the night air, a mournful symphony of loss. Each breath felt heavy, weighted with sorrow, and the unspoken goodbyes that hung like shrouds over every abandoned home. Inside an abandoned home, the candle's light flickered weakly against the encroaching darkness, casting elongated shadows that danced across cracked plaster walls. Outside, the wind carried whispers through empty windows, mingling with distant hoots of owls and howls of wolves. Each breath felt heavy, weighted with sorrow and loss. The hooded figure moved silently through the village, each step a careful balance on rain-slick cobblestones, as if treading the thin line between life and death. The hooded figure stood at the threshold of an abandoned church, its doors hanging askew on rusted hinges. Inside, shadows clung to crumbling pews and shattered stained glass, casting eerie silhouettes across the floor. A single candle flickered weakly in the nave, its light barely piercing the thick darkness that enveloped the sacred space. Outside, the wind carried whispers of decay through broken windows, mingling with distant hoots of owls and howls of wolves. Each breath felt heavy, weighted with sorrow and loss. The hooded figure moved past the village well, its rope coiled and still. Inside an abandoned home, a single candle burned low, casting flickering shadows on peeling wallpaper. Outside, the night was thick with silence, save for the distant cry of an owl and the mournful howl of wolves. Each step through the empty streets felt like treading water in a sea of sorrow. The air hung heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and decay, as if the village itself had ceased to breathe. The hooded figure moved through the silent streets, each step crunching on the remnants of forgotten lives. In an empty square, children's toys lay scattered among the weeds. A single candle flickered in a distant window, its light barely piercing the thick darkness that clung to every corner. Outside, the wind carried whispers through broken windows, mingling with the mournful howls of wolves and hoots of owls. The air was heavy with rain-soaked earth and decay, as if the village itself had ceased to breathe. The hooded figure paused at the edge of a small garden, now overgrown with wildflowers and untended herbs. A single candle burned in a nearby window, casting flickering shadows on the cracked stone walls. Outside, the wind whispered through broken shutters, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and decay. Each step felt like walking through a dreamscape where time had stopped, leaving only echoes of laughter and whispers of sorrow. The hooded figure entered a once bustling marketplace, now silent and overgrown. Weeds pushed through cracked cobblestones, and the scent of decay lingered in the air. A single candle flickered weakly inside a shop, casting shadows on shelves of abandoned goods. Outside, the wind carried whispers through broken shutters, mingling with distant hoots of owls and mournful howls of wolves. Each step felt like walking through a graveyard where life had simply ceased to exist. The hooded figure stood at the edge of the village square, where weeds now stretched toward an indifferent sky. A single candle flickered inside a nearby cottage, its light barely piercing the twilight. Shadows danced across the cobblestones as the wind whispered through broken windows and howled mournfully among the ruins. Each step felt like walking through a dreamscape where time had frozen, leaving only echoes of laughter and whispers of sorrow. The hooded figure moved past a row of shuttered windows, their frames hanging crooked from disuse. Inside one, the dim light of a dying candle cast shadows on peeling wallpaper, as if ghosts still lingered in the rooms they once called home. Outside, weeds climbed over cracked stones and broken shutters, their tendrils reaching toward the sky like desperate fingers. The wind whispered through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of rain-soaked earth and decay, as if the village itself had been left to rot. The wind has died down, and the darkness begins to lift as dawn approaches. You can feel the softness of your bed beneath you, hear the distant hum of a city or village waking up. This quiet night is over, but remember the silence that once enveloped these forgotten places. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and subscribe for more. We'll be here whenever you need to drift away.